it was all inspiration. We jammed, and we all just wanted to reach deep. We had new instruments or configurations. Everybody had something. It was just fun. I mean, for me, you too. You're bringing in the whatever stuff you brought in.
You always have a lot of toys and new
string.
guitars.
I had the different setup, but I don't know. For me, I wanted to push things. I wasn't thinking of any other albums personally. I just wanted to push stuff from my instrument to things I've never been able to fit in or do, and everybody, I just wanted to look at everyone having a good time.
2021's A View from the Top of the World is yet another Modern Dream Theater album. I will admit to not being a fan of Modern Dream Theater, but this album is not as bad as I'm about to make it seem. Any fan of Dream Theater's modern work will like this album. But for me, the songwriting just doesn't do it for me. For every other complaint that I'm going to have about this album, if the songwriting was good, for the most part I could ignore the rest. Except in a song that's 20 minutes long. That's a whole different story. Speaking of the lengths of the songs on this album, after the previous album, which had mostly reasonable song lengths, this album is back to the train of thought style of only putting a few songs on the album and having them all be way longer than they needed to be. To be fair, I've felt this way about the length of this band's songs ever since Images and Words. There's one song over 10 minutes long, two more that are approaching 10 minutes, and another one that's over 20 minutes long. There's no excuse for a song to be that long. And the worst part is, this band doesn't do anything new or interesting to justify the length of these songs. If a band is going to make songs this long, they really need to put a lot of change-ups and add a lot of new elements to them to make them interesting to listen to from start to finish. And Dream Theater has done some 10-minute epics that have worked. Their one hit Pull Me Under is approaching 10 minutes, and that song is great from start to finish. Home is over 11 minutes, and that's an amazing song. But these types of song lengths should be reserved for special occasions. Moments where they have a lot of creativity and a lot of good ideas that they want to pack into one track. That's not what happens here. If you've heard the self-titled album, this is a weaker version of that album. I'm really disappointed in the performances by James and John in particular. And it's not a question of their abilities. John is a fantastic guitarist, and everything he plays on this album is very technical. And I do really like James's voice, but I'm not hearing anything new coming from their performances. John plays the same guitar riffs, the same guitar solos, everything that we've heard over and over again. James uses a lot of the same melodies that we've heard, except his voice is lacking passion, which can be said for the whole band over the last decade or so, pretty much ever since Mike Portnoy left the band. They feel like a machine on autopilot. Everything sounds very robotic. There needs to be a good balance of emotion in an album to keep the listener invested. Not just robotic, hey, this is technical, so be impressed. The standout on this album is Mike on the drums. I think he does a pretty solid job. Oddly enough, my pick for second best performance on this one would be from Jordan on the keyboards. That's really weird for me to say because I've been really critical of his performances in the past. But he does a pretty decent job here. Granted, I'm not asking much from the drummer or keyboardist. And I've got no beef with the bassist. He's usually buried in the mix anyway, so you can't usually hear his work anyways. Now I get that these guys are older now. I get that that creative spark just isn't there anymore like it was in the early days. There's a certain passion to youth that can't be replicated. When you get older, it's typically gone. This album is a chore to listen to. I have tried multiple times to get through it. I cannot get through this in one sitting. The album opens with The Alien. This track is okay, but it lasts way too long. It clocks in at almost 10 minutes, whereas it should be more like 5 minutes long. There are a lot of sections like the melodic guitar solo at about the 1 minute 20 mark during the intro, as well as the last bit of the chorus, which drag this track out a lot longer than it needs to be. But I do like that the first and second verses are very different from one another. The chorus is mostly okay except for that last part, which drags it out. If you have a chorus that's only okay, it needs to get in and get out. Just get in, get to the point, and then be done with it. There's a melodic section during the instrumental break that's pretty good, with some good drumming and a nice melodic guitar solo by John. But the first part of the instrumental break is typical Dream Theater wankery. And after the last chorus, the song really should have ended, and it just keeps going for a minute or two. I like this track. It doesn't really feel like it's as long as the length would suggest, but it's only an okay song, and it's my favorite song on the album, if that tells you anything. Answering the Call is my second favorite track on the album. This one is a bit slower and a couple minutes shorter than the previous track. It definitely has that been there, done that feel like this entire album, but I do like the mix of the keyboards and the muted guitar riffs during the verses. The vocals are for the most part decent, although I feel like we've heard these melodies before. The chorus sounds a little bit different, but has some odd pauses where nothing interesting happens musically. I'm also not a big fan of the solo on this track. Like with the previous track, this one's just okay and lasts longer than it probably should. Invisible Monsters is a frustrating track. Musically, it's actually pretty good and has some nice progression. From the quiet guitars that start off the track to the melodic intro, Jordan does some nice keyboard and piano work on this track. I like the blend of the muted guitar riffs with that piano in the first verse. The second verse has a lot more going on, and like with Alien, I like that the first and second verses are a bit different from one another. It helps the song feel less repetitive. But the chorus is bland and uninteresting, the lyrics are terrible, and James's performance lacks any emotion whatsoever. So this song just comes across as wasted potential. Sleeping Giant is a 10-minute filler track. I actually like the verses quite a bit, but I don't like anything else about this song. Transcending Time is probably my third favorite song on this album. I really like the mood to this track. It's very peaceful and melodic. For once, it feels like they are trying to put together a good chorus. It doesn't quite work out, but at least I feel like there's some effort. The guitar solo is a bit too shreddy for my taste for a song like this. They should have gone with something more melodic, especially given that we have plenty of shreddy solos throughout this album. I do like that this track at least sounds a little bit different for this band, contrary to a lot of my criticisms of this album and the last 10 years or so of this band's work. Oh, right. Awaken the Master. More like awaken me, am I right? If it isn't bad enough that this band is taking ideas from previous albums, now it feels like they're taking ideas from earlier in this album. This is at least the third track that has had piano in the background over muted guitar riffs. I praised that before as I thought it was a bit interesting and I liked the contrast, but at this point it's just getting tiring. This song approaches the 10-minute mark, which is an eternity for a song, and it doesn't keep my interest at all. I don't like anything about this track. And finally, we get to the mammoth title track, A View from the Top of the World. And this song is incredibly frustrating. You can already imagine this being a 20-minute song, I'm not going to like it. And it's really frustrating because a lot of the best aspects of this album are in this song. Both the first and second verse sound different from one another. This time, the second verse being a lot softer and slower than the first. So that's a slight change from the way they would split that up in previous tracks. James sounds better on this track than he sounds on any other song on the album. This song has the best chorus this band has had since the self-titled album, which came out in 2013. There's a really good solo towards the second half of this track. There's an okay, quieter part of this song, although that could have been cut. But it's all crammed into a 20-minute track. If they just took out the aspects of this song that are good and made an 8-minute track, this would be the highlight of the album. But it's full of so much nonsense. The first instrumental break after the second chorus, Jordan's playing starts to get dangerously close to that territory that I cannot stand. And this first instrumental section feels absolutely pointless. And speaking of pointless, the intro to this track is 2 minutes long. The song doesn't even feel like it starts until the 2-minute mark. That's 2 more minutes that could have been cut from this thing, and nothing would have been lost. Most of this track after the good guitar solo I mentioned could probably be cut. It's just a shame because so many of the best moments on this album are in this track, but they are wasted with so much pointless filler. Again, this album is not as bad as I'm making it out to seem. There are some aspects that I do like. The playing is very technical, I like the changes in the different verses in each song, but the songwriting is just not there for me. I cannot find any way of connecting to any of these songs. It's not their worst album. That honor still goes to The Astonishing. The only other album I might dislike more would be Black Clouds. And even that album has Rite of Passage, which is a better song than anything on here. It definitely feels phoned in. The thing is, I don't even need them to grow. If they wanted to repeat the self-titled album over and over again, as long as there's passion in the music, and good songwriting, and passion in the vocals, I'm down. But that's not what's on this album. It's just emotionless retreads of stuff that we've heard before. And I'm critical because I care. I want Dream Theater to put out good albums. But that's not what they did here. And it's time I stop expecting them to do so. I'm sure most Dream Theater fans will like this album, and that's fine. But it's not for me.